Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Gambis. I'm the artistic director of Imagine Science Films and excited to be with everyone today. This is part of these conversations that we're going to be having are part of our Imagine Science live series. So a few times a month, we invite filmmakers to talk about their films that are currently on our sister platform called labocine.com. And we're very excited. This is going to be our fourth in the series. We show fiction, documentary, short films, animation, mostly content that pushes the boundaries of how we think about science in film. We're very interested at Imagine Science with hybrid work, with work that really challenges some of these stereotypes about scientific communication and science on film, which has been recently very stereotyped into specific ways of thinking about that. I also want to mention before we introduce our speaker, our director today, that we will be having our 13th annual Imagine Science Film Festival. It's going to be online this year, and it will happen from October 16th to the 23rd. We're going to have about 100 films that are going to play over 8 days. All of it is going to be virtual, but that also brings a lot of opportunities of having conversations and workshops and other events. We will also have a few more live events. We have Peter Medler that will be speaking about his film, The End of Time, next week. And we have a few more that are going to be happening as we proceed with the fall. So today I'm very excited to have Shawn Snyder. He is a friend from NYU and also the director of To Dust. I'm going to read a little bit about Shawn and then bring him on. Shawn Snyder grew up in South Florida. After receiving a BA in religion from Harvard, he spent most of his 20s on the road as a singer-songwriter. The last 7 years have seen a return to Shawn's long-standing passion for filmmaking, during which he completed his studies at NYU's graduate film program. His short film, Festus, won the 2004 Cine Golden Eagle Award for Best Student Drama and later premiered on KQED's Film School Shorts. His follow-up, Lulu, premiered at Palm Springs International Short Fest in 2015. And his first feature that we're going to be speaking about today, To Dust, co-written by longtime collaborator Justin Big, premiered at the 2018 Tribeca Film Festival, where it won the Narrative Audience Award. And Shawn received also the award for Best New Narrative Director. The film was released last year in 2019 by Good Deed Entertainment, which thank you so much for making this happen today. And To Dust was also part of the IFP 2015 Emergent Storytellers, the recipient of the NYU Alfred P. Sloan Foundation Prize, which is $100,000 for the first feature award, and also the TFI's 2016 Sloan Student Grand Jury Prize. It also received support from NYU's Production Lab, and Shawn is also a former IFP Marcy Bloom Fellow and Sundance Institute Feature Film Fellow. And last but not least, he was one of the 25 new faces of independent film in Filmmakers Magazine in 2016. We're going to be speaking today with Shawn. And before we bring him on, I wanted to first show the trailer of To Dust. So let's begin with that.
Can I help you?
You are a scientist?
I'm a science teacher.
I have questions.
I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to be of service to you, Rabbi.
I'm not a rabbi. My wife, she died. I fear her soul is suffering until she returns to the earth. What's to become of her body?
They use pigs. They most closely resemble people. The body is reduced to tiny bits of skin and bone.
And how long does this take?
I suppose one could bury a pig. I don't imagine that that's kosher.
I buried a pig.
We're having office hours here. Just realized nobody knows where I am. Should have left a note. This is unscientific at best. You me a pig more like your wife. No offense.
Will this make you better?
I hope it will.
I'm here to see Shmuel. He's a friend of mine, a business friend. Look, it's a body farm in Tennessee.
What's a body farm?
We have on our hands a woman. She was buried 6 feet under back in June. What's that body gonna look like right about now?
Where did you say you were from?
His blood is on our hands.
His mud is on my carpet. What are you after, Shmuel? What is this all about?
I don't know.
What's your friend's name?
Shmuel.
Jesus loves you, Shmuel.
Shawn, it's so great to see you. It's been a while, and we're delighted to have you as part of the series. Yeah, let's dive right into it. The format of this, of this talks are very informal, and we can kind of go into twists and turns. But first, how are you doing? Yeah,
I'm doing well, as well as any of us are doing during these times. Miniature life upheavals amidst global upheavals, but we're getting along.
Well, Shawn, so I wanted to speak a little bit. Well, we're going to talk about the film. It's been about a year, right, or a year and a half since it came out. This is an incredible film that mixes science and religion and dark comedy. There are so many layers to it, also about the fragility and the vulnerability of both science and religion. That we're not always sure about answers in both worlds, and I think that's something that struck me a lot when I watched the film. Was kind of we always think about science and religion as being the archetypes of knowing, right? Of knowing how things are. And what struck me is that you really kind of pierce into this vulnerability or this fragility of it. Yeah, I mean, I know that this is relatively, you may have been asked this a while, and it's been a while since you made it. But how did you originally come up with this idea? I know that it probably went through different phases of evolution and composition and decomposition.
Decomposition and recomposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the earliest seeds of it kind of were planted when my mom died. I lost my mom in 12 years ago. Every time I have to recalculate that number, it's a little bit jarring. And I come from a Reform Jewish background, which is certainly not a Hasidic background at all. And I've always waxed and waned in relationship to my own Judaism. But I felt that my family, we were mourning her in the Reform Jewish way. I wanted that. I've always valued it always sounded very, very beautiful, the sort of Jewish understanding of mourning. Even while it's ancient, it's also very modern and a lot of its structures and wisdom. And it's this idea about bringing the mourner back to the world of the living and focusing on life. The mourner's Kaddish in Judaism, the prayer that you say for the dead, never mentions the dead. It mentions kind of like acceptance and getting back to the world of the living. And there's also a very specific timeline for Jewish mourning. So it's, there's 7 days of what's called Shiva. There's 30 days, which is called for certain family members that you're mourning, called the Shilashim, the first month. And then there's sort of, for parents specifically, there's a year of sort of mourning that's ritualized. And then there's memorials every single year. And so it was a rigid timeline for grief. And so even, I found myself not, my own grief spilling outside the boundaries of those timelines and those confines, and sort of, started to find that grief is as individual as the relationship between the mourner and he or she who is being mourned, and that any suggestion that one could restrict that or guide that or not let that run its course started to feel offensive to me. It's 12 years on and I still mourn my mom, and I don't want to exercise that grief. I want to embrace the ways in which it continues to evolve, and which my own existential compass continues to evolve in relation to that. My own relationship with my mom in her absence continues to evolve. So I found myself also at that time thinking about that Jewish timeline, which would give you these checkpoints for your own grief and how you are doing, and the markers of time. And I found my very natural human thoughts. And I think that many of us, our minds go in this direction, and we don't have cultures, religions, societies, you know, that support the naturally morbid. You know, so it would be like 7 days, and I'd be wondering, okay, well, what is my mom's, who was once here 7 days ago? What does her body look like right now? It's been 30 days. What does it look like now? And so I was finding the Jewish way of marking time to be setting up these, you know, morbid checkpoints to be thinking about her body. And I never went as crazy as Shmuel went with that. I think that I kind of repressed those thoughts in the way that we're encouraged to. And you have friends and family and who all in your best interest, you know, in mind, are, if you were to confess to those thoughts, are telling you don't think about those things. That's not the way that we think about it. And I figured that if one were given the permission to mourn in the way that they wanted, and if one had the stomach, you know, and the fortitude to stare those existential and biological realities in their face, that there might be a spiritual and emotional catharsis in them, and that release is as profound as any other. And that moreover, that if one went down that, you know, the hypothesis of researching the film was that if one went down that rabbit hole of looking at those things, that there might be a point of connection with religion. And I think that I found that there's a lot of really like interesting ones in terms of a lot of the specifics, especially once you get into Kabbalistic Judaism and various rates at which the body decomposes. There's a lot of very sort of fascinating statistics, but as you said, I think that the biggest intersection is a point of humility, where, you know, mystery is mystery, and that instead of being frustrated by that mystery, you have to surrender to it. And I think there's something very spiritual in reaching that point. So,
Shawn, just to add something to that, it seems what's really fascinating is because when you initially just spoke about the film, you know, like in the first few things that you mentioned, the thing that struck me was this reference to time, right? That time is, you know, I mean, you thinking about your mother's death, you know, how long has passed, this idea of time that is so encrusted into the film. And in a way, there's like impatience, right? Like there's an urgency to understand, right? From Shmuel, he wants to understand because the death was sort of untimely. It happened too soon. So there's also that aspect to it. But then it almost, the resolution of the film is that he almost kind of comes to terms with kind of the idea of time passing, or is no longer so restricted to this idea of time. And I cut you there, but it's almost like he comes to terms not only with the death, but with this idea of time, you know, which I felt was really powerful. Like he's calmer. He's no longer impatient. He's no longer needing kind of this like rapid, you know, urgency to his life. And I thought that was a really interesting aspect to the film, was kind of that relationship to time.
Yeah. No, for sure. And yeah, you can't, you know, there's the only thing to do, no matter what the circumstances are, is surrender to time, because you can't stop it or control it at all. And I think too that in that time and in that urgency, like he gets caught in these cycles, you know, the return, you know, doing, you know, the definition of insanity, like doing the same thing over and over again and thinking that that's going to be the thing that breaks the, you know, that thaws the insanity, or that lets you move on. And everything is just a point of surrender. And what are the things that let us surrender? You know, like human connection, acceptance, in front of the unknown, your children in front of you, like what you have, what is and not what if.
Yeah. I mean, without revealing too much, and by the way, I should mention that the film is going to play, you know, for a few days on our platform. It's going to play at 7 p.m. So if anybody who wants to watch it, you know, please watch it. We're having actually this conversation before the release of the film. But Shawn, tell me a little bit. So more kind of let's get into the the meat of this. So the story is about Shmuel, who's a Hasidic cantor basically in upstate New York, and he's tormented by the death of his of his wife, and sort of that's how the film begins. And he's tries to kind of seek religious serenity or solace, and the way he does that is by trying to find answers about the death, right, and about the body, which is interesting because you often refer to the body as still being her, right, still being the wife. The body still has that aspect of still being his wife, and is not like depossessed of that identity in a way. And so he does that by meeting a scientist. So the Shmuel is played by Gezeroig from Son of Saul, and Albert, who is a scientist he goes to see, who's a community science teacher, biology teacher, who hasn't quite finished his biology degree, but became a teacher and is also kind of interested in diving into the study of decay and decomposition. So how did you come up with this story? I mean, I guess, how did you craft this idea? Was it something that kind of just came to you, or, because I understand that, like, taking something personal and bringing it into a story that is kind of speaks to your own experience, but also is separate, must not be that easy.
Yeah, I actually really like the Sausage Factory story on this one, because all of that, that first answer is all of the emotional foundations that sort of lie latent in me, and I had been working on a screenplay that was maybe even more explicitly, seemingly autobiographical, and I often find that when you're writing autobiography, we have a cameo appearance.
Oh, there we go. The the sun
in front of you. Yeah. This is Ainsley.
Hello.
When you're writing explicit autobiography, there's so much. You're running PR for yourself. I want a foible, but I don't want that foible. that one's a sexier flaw. And
like
so
reinventing your own life in a way, like kind of repatching things.
Yeah. So I've always, Jason and I both, my writing partner, always love the idea of genre as well. And that, like, genre can almost be when you can take your dark and dirty and strange and warts that you don't want to show, and you can sort of like cast them through the prism of genre. And it's like, okay, now I'm every character. Like, I feel like To Dust is the most autobiographical thing I've ever written, while I'm not a cantor who lost his wife or buried pigs in the woods. So
you're all of those people, and you're also the pig as well.
Yeah, maybe most of all. I don't know. So it was third year at NYU, and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation offers as you had mentioned, this $100,000 first-time feature award. And I'd always had a lot of respect for the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, but I always felt that it was like in your wheelhouse. We had classmates who had PhDs in astrophysics, and it felt like a lot of the the Sloan content was biography based, and celebrating scientific discoveries. And but I figured it would be worth going to this orientation session. Doran Weber, who's the head of the Sloan Foundation, is just an amazing man and amazing mind. And I remember, sitting there, and this is like the wheels of fate, if one wants to get, think about things in that way. Like, it's as likely that I would have blown that orientation session off as that I went to it and ended up there that night. And I sat there, and he kind of started throwing down the gauntlet and saying, science films, he said, don't have to be what we think science films always are. And Pi would have made a great science film. And he said Breaking Bad would have made a great science film. And for my limited knowledge of Sloan at that point, I kind of said, well, you say that, you know, in the rearview mirror, would you have funded those movies had they come to you in treatment form or script form? And I don't know the answer, but I kind of took him at his word, and so sort of took that challenge. And as we know, like, making a feature is years and years of your life and soul and energy. You don't want to ever do it if it's going to be opportunistic, because there's $100,000 to make a movie about science. And I'm the least, you know, I'm, you know, studied the humanities. I have a general, you know, deep curiosity about the world, but I don't have a particularly ingrained scientific bone in my body. So I feel like the least likely person to have, you know, ventured on a film about science. And so the question that I had to ask myself, and it was sitting in that room and it was on the subway ride home, was, is there a scientific question that has ever occurred in my life that has an emotional undertone, that would have an arc and a journey and would be the stuff of character? And also this sense too, that is there a version in which the scientific inquiry is actually connected to the emotional arc and the catharsis? And it's not, you know, this character who, okay, now he happens to be a scientist. And I often feel that Sloan sees through that often. You know, I just took this other script and I made him an astrophysics. It says, that's bread, my love. You can grab a piece of bread. I don't know, up there. Or some chips. My heart, there's a bag of chips right there. Over in there, the blue bag.
You eat a bag of chips.
Yeah, it's all right. I would never just surrender to the bag of chips.
It could have very well been, you know, Shmuel could have gone in to see a like astrophysicist to learn about the Big Bang and how that, yeah. You know, it could have been.
Yeah. And so I realized, you know, in that meeting that those questions and those thoughts that I had about my mom's body, if one were to follow those to their logical conclusion, were scientific questions. And there were scientific questions that were driven by emotion, and then scientific questions that also, I studied religion, my evolving, waxing, waning relationship with my Judaism and spirituality at large has been a, you know, huge part of my life. Then you would have a question about grief, the right to grieve, the way one wants to grieve, and you would have a question, you know, questions about religion and questions about science. I can't help you with that fourth category. Yogurt. Put yogurt on there.
That's what we call multitasking.
Yeah, yes, it should, my love. You gotta ask Mama these questions right now. That you would be entering into a conversation with all of these things, and I wanted a movie that made for, you know, I don't want to make movies that are didactic. I want to make movies that are conversations, and in the Judaism way, like that's the way Jewish thought works. You ask a question, you answer that question with a question, and you answer that question with another question. And that there'd be really interesting things to explore and not necessarily have the answers to. And then Jason, you know, when I pitched the idea to Jason, it was always sort of darkly funny to me. But Jason's first sense, and, you know, we collaborate and complement and supplement each other in these various ways. And he's a real genrephile. So he said, you know, and this is like a week into me thinking about this, he said, this is a B horror movie. This is a Val Lewton body snatchers film that we would, you know, should really, really lean into and embrace the horror tropes. And then as we were writing, this is a buddy movie. And we knew that it was funny, but we never knew that it would be as explicitly Borscht Belt as it turned out to be. But I think that as we were writing it, because the material was so dark, that the ability to make each other laugh was a release valve on that. And I think that humor is holy, and I think that humor is religion. I think that that's a huge bent in Judaism. But in terms of, you know, that thought about humility, I think that humor, you know, is humility. Like if we have the ability to laugh at the human condition. And so even the lowest brow jokes about a Hasidic Jew and bacon and a pig, you know, are designed to be, you know, self-conscious Borscht Belty groaners, kind of deriving from the weirdness of the situation itself. and it's, so can we be crying, you know, so then we create the tightrope and the magic trick, you know, that we want to pull off, which is the Hasidic emotional drama film about grief with decaying pigs that's Borscht Belty and a B horror bromance between two people. Road trip film gets thrown in there as well. And I think that one of the cool things too is that a lot of the strangeness of the film, Jason always describes this like we were discovering the film, like this weird artifact existed, and it was our research that led us to it. And so I sort of assumed, you know, okay, I'm going to go to Google, I'm going to search how a body decays. There's going to be a relatively clear answer to it, and the curtain's going to close on the film because there's going to be no drama. And instead, I found the world of forensic taphonomy and forensic, you know, the forensic world, the existence of body farms. You know, people ask about body farms. Oh, did you make that up? And no, it's a real thing. And when you find that exists, you say this has to go in the film. And when you find that you're already dealing with a Hasidic character and that pigs are the proxies used by science for human bodies, then there's no way not to lead into that. So even all of the weirdness and the sacrosanctness of the film, the sacrilegiousness and that kind of comedy wasn't us imposing it on the material. It was us treating both the rabbit hole of the science and the rabbit hole of Hasidic and Kabbalistic mystical Judaism seriously, and just finding these juxtapositions and intersections. And so the tone, you know, was guiding us more than we were guiding the tone. And then miraculously, we would get from next round to next round with this NYU Sloan grant incubation period, and then we wound up winning the money, and then the Sloan opportunities led to other opportunities, and through Tribeca and hooking us up with our producers, Emily Mortimer, Alessandra Nivola, Ron Perlman, these actors who I've always admired, and then ultimately realizing, and this is sort of, you know, the biggest takeaway for me moving forward, and the biggest thing that I sort of like to, I don't know, preach about, that there's this hope that when you go weird and dark and into your warts, which I think, you know, this ties back to the genre allowed us to do. Like, this was so emotionally raw and vulnerable. And if this was only ever therapy for me and the movie never got made, it would have served its purpose. But it's when you're able to be honest and vulnerable in that way that you tap into something that feels universal. And I think that the reason why the film has found its champions is because everyone who came to the project spoke to a kindred sense of, you know, was either recently aggrieved or within the last few years and had these thoughts and had felt very embarrassed by these thoughts and had felt very embraced and forgiven by the film. So there's this sense of, you know, Sloan is, I don't think that I would, whatever fledgling career I have after this or whatever hopes for the future, like if it wasn't stumbling into that Sloan meeting and being willing to think outside the box of my own obsessions and sort of enter the box of like thinking about science and othering this material, that box, you know, you can never outrun your obsessions. You can never outrun your stylistic interests. This movie also unlocked a sense of comedy, of tone, of darkness, of like the Tim Burton child in me that I think I put aside in film school. It's like, I want to do serious character studies. And it allowed all of those things to come swarming back in and be, so Sloan is my guy.
I think what's also amazing about the film, Shawn, is that it really is homage to like this idea of scientific process, right? And like this idea that, you know, initially Shmuel comes in and says like, I want answers, right? I want immediate answers, but then the resolution or the kind of the conclusion at that point is, well, we need to keep investigating, right? And actually that's where the comedy comes in, because like all of these investigations of them, and also as you and Jason as, you know, as screenwriters and directors, it leads you into these different worlds, right? But that's kind of part of the process of discovering, whether it's about religion or whether it's about science, is that And in a way, all of these kind of like digressions and you know, the body farm and all of these things is, I feel like it pays homage to the fact that these questions are not simply answered, right? That you need to kind of go, and you sometimes need to go into pseudoscience, you need to go into, you know, medicine, you need to go, you know, back into kind of the emotional realm. And I feel like that really pays homage to this idea of scientific discovery or scientific understanding is quite complex, actually, and it's not, you know, it's more than just meets the eye, and I think that the film does a really good job at that.
And one of the things, and that comes from the perspective of being a layperson, and also treating the science in the movie seriously. Again, I felt a huge responsibility to Sloane's endorsement of this project. You never wanted to like half-ass the science, like a really big commitment, but I was allowed, you know, I felt great leaning into that because it was so inherent to the emotional journey and the rest of the material as well. But we were, you know,
it was
always
inherent to the character, right? To Albert, played by Matthew Broderick, because he's also not fully aware. He doesn't have all the answers, right? So it's kind of, it pays, you know, it's not like, you know, you in a way, the lack of knowledge that you may have had, you've embodied it into this character that wants to understand and never fully became you know, like an eminent professor, but instead a community college professor, you know, and I feel like that you did really well with that, yeah.
And we're always, you know, me in life, me and Jason as writers, like you're drawn to the underdog, you know, the idea of the polished scientist, you know, well, there's great stories about that aren't interesting to us. I guess, you know, maybe that's part of a Coen Brothers Jarmusch streak. We're streaking us, like where are the misfits? And they're going to be practicing very imperfect science in increasingly illegal settings. And some of the comedy comes from there, but also that allows, as you said, like them to, you know, Broderick to strive and Broderick to Albert to get bit by the bug that probably led him to this in the first place. And I always, you know, people look at the movie, and again, we're entering a strange tone where it shifts between surrealism and realism, and there is sort of like a folkloric parable quality to it. So, you know, when folks come, especially in the Jewish realm, and say like how he did the most he ends up in the most sacrilegious place that one could possibly end up, and I can't get behind this movie. This is a man that's sinning. I'm like, well, all of Bible stories and Jewish Talmudic midrashic stories are built on people who sin. Like any Jewish folklore is built on people taking the wrong road and having to either return or come back from it. So much of that is built into Judaism. So that initial reaction to the Jewish realm, you know, people say, I feel like Shmuel was too naive. You know, you're portraying him as too naive, which is a whole other conversation about the Hasidic world and secular education. Because, you know, I remember reading an article in the course of the research of this film about someone who had left the Hasidic community, and these are very, very tense issues, you know, dense issues. And so to simplify, it seems like I'm being normative on either side of the argument. But
they're imbued with so much, you know, layers of complexity in discussing them that,
and so this was a Hasidic man who went to college, who left the Hasidic community, went to college, and was drawn to science, and realized that at the age of 23 he had never heard the word molecule in his life. And to look at that and to look at Shmuel as being naive, like Shmuel is brilliant. He just has to use and the way the Jewish mind engages in text and Torah and conversation is brilliant. He just has to take it and put it into a strange concept. And I thought, as I said, that I would go to Google and the concept of decomposition would be relatively simple and straightforward. And then you look at Albert, like, well, he's a professor, he should know more than he actually knows. You're making him dumber for the sake of the drama. And we had this great, you know, along the road, we had these amazing scientific advisors. And as I started to learn about the history of this field of research, it is relatively new. It happened in the 70s. It happened based on criminal inquiries. And most of it is done, you know, people donate their body to body farms because they believe in the mission of solving crimes. And so if you're going to waste that body on the understanding about how a normal death, in a coffin passed away, that research isn't really going to lead to any ethical furthering of scientific understanding of how to capture criminals. So how a normal body decays under normal conditions is actually not as researched in the field. And our first science advisor, who was wonderful, Megan Minter, that Sloan had hooked us up with, even, at some point we realized that her knowledge was limited by the textbook knowledge, which is limited by a body decaying on the surface. The scientific experiments are done with body decaying on the surface. And then we had Sofia Maravudos at the body farm in Texas, and then ultimately we landed through Sloan and Tribeca after the script had been written with Donnie Stedman, who is at the body farm, who is the head of the body farm in Tennessee, and she is amazing. I learned so much about the field and how one gets into that field and the ethics of that field. There was a really awkward interaction with her at the very, very beginning in our first conversation where the photographer Sally Mann had shot this beautifully haunting photo series at the body farm in Tennessee. And I thought that maybe somehow gave us an in to like, wouldn't it be amazing to actually shoot decomposing bodies at the body farm? And it was instantly shut off. She said that her predecessor had, given Sally Mann carte blanche, and that it was a huge ethical mistake that had been done. So I started to learn about the ethics, but also, I don't want to ruin the film in this conversation to some extent, but sort of like things that happen with the bodies, the various states of decay. Our original science advisor said, well, if it was 8 months, and we were so specific about the timelines, the summer, the season that she died, the weight that she died, if she died of cancer, if it was 8 months, she would clearly be decomposed this far. And there's a tension of the research. And then we got to Donnie Stedman, who said, well, no, if she's buried 6 feet below the ground, anything below 4 or 5 feet actually cancels out the climate, cancels out the bugs. And it would be relatively reasonable that her body would be intact. So even within the science, there are these debates.
Confounding, ideas. But it brings me to an interesting point. There's the ethics of the field itself, and then, of course, the ethics of what is allowed to be, to be exposed, right? To be filmed, to be photographed, to be discussed. And so I thought that's, kind of the ethics of the field itself, but the ethics of how do you document it, and also this idea that maybe because you don't document it, because of the fact that you're, it's human bodies, leads to kind of this, urban legends that come around it, and not everybody agrees to, there isn't like one straight answer about it. I wanted to play a clip. I wanted to go, because we could go on for hours about this, but I wanted to just play a clip of Shmuel meeting Albert, which is an amazing scene where he kind of stumbles into the classroom. So if we could play that one. Well, I love the scene so much because it really gets right into this idea of wanting answers, but also the limitations of, religion and science. And we clearly very, very immediately, we understand who these people are and their aspirations or what they don't know. And I feel like there's a lot that is kind of communicated in this. Tell me a little bit about how you, how did you come up with getting Geza to be Shmuel and Matthew Broderick? I mean, I know this is probably, we could also speak hours about these characters, but it just seems like they're just, it's an amazing cast for these two. And you would think, that Albert, or knowing Matthew Broderick, that he would be a kind of like the comedic one, but in some ways Shmuel is also kind of like, is the one that really provides the humor. And so it's just really fascinating to think about that. How did you come up with these actors for these roles?
So this is before our producers came on. I had a dear friend and mentor who was an early champion of the script at Sony Pictures Classics. And he read the script just as they had purchased Son of Saul. It hadn't been out. It had been doing the festival circuit, but it hadn't been released yet. And he read the script, and his first thought was, "You have to meet Geza. He's one of the most fascinating, talented human beings." So Geza, in short, is a Hungarian poet. He never intended to be an actor. He went to film school when he was younger. He was in punk bands in Hungary. He is a modern Orthodox Jew. He converted to Judaism early on in his life. He was a Hasidic Jew for a while, and he had his own reasons for leaving the Hasidic faith and settling into the modern Orthodox faith. He works as a member of a Chevra Kadisha, which is a Jewish burial society. So he prepares Jewish bodies for burial. So I didn't learn that about Geza. Geza is was like an onion, where you think that would be the first thing that would come up in our conversation. And I had to read it in a New Yorker article months after we met. And so
he probably first told you that he was in a punk band, and then later on all the rest.
Yeah. And so I saw a press screening of Son of Saul. I got access through a friend at Sony Pictures, and had heard so many incredible things about the film. And I like to say that I'm the only human being in the world who saw Son of Saul trying to wonder whether or not Geza Rory could be funny, and who watched that tragic, heartbreaking, intense film and trying to see if there was a comedian there. And the funny thing is that if one watches that movie from that perspective and in no way laughing at the film, Geza is so Chaplin-esque in that film. It's like he is a master clown in the physicality of the way. I mean, and also just in sort of the plot setup, every single moment that he skirts with and dances with death bounces off of his back, and he somehow survives on this weird mission through the concentration camp. And
even in the way he speaks, I feel like there's almost a different rhythm. He's listening, he also responds. There's almost Chaplin-esque, not only in his physicality, but also in the way he speaks. I find it, which is also part of the humor. Sorry.
Yeah, and when I say, Chaplin is the biggest compliment I could give to any actor, comedic or dramatic, because it embodies that pathos and humanism and humanity alongside the comedy, which is maybe speaks that I'm psychoanalyzing myself in real time, to that idea of loving the underdog, loving the person who sets out to do the thing and can't pull it off. And I also found this instant, I call it photo negative, in Son of Saul. So it's about a man who, in the most inhumane conditions, insists on a proper Jewish burial, and he'll go to these great lengths to try to make that happen as this redemptive act. And to Dust is, a man in the comforts of 20th century United States, in his own community, who can't find comfort in the proper Jewish burial and will go to the most insane extents to undo that and fix it in a way that feels right. And Geza, as a poet, he said, I said it was a photo negative, and he said I had to do this movie because it rhymed with Son of Saul. Yeah. And Geza was getting, offers at the time, and we were the bane of his agent's existence, because they were like, this movie that's never going to get made, this is the thing that you want to grow your beard for 9 months, you're not going to get auditions anywhere else. And Geza, who is a man who lives with the most integrity out of any human being I've ever met in my life, is like, I'm content sitting and writing Hungarian poetry for no money. I only want to do art if it engages. So Geza and I met after I saw the film, and there was no question. Maybe he was different than I envisioned the character at first, but that's the thing, the beauty about film. If you stick with the cartoon version in your head, it never grows or evolves. Here I met in front of me the man who had to play this role for so many reasons. And so we had, Sloane's $100,000 and Geza Rohrig on our team. And then the beauty of finding these producers and sort of them cracking open, their world and their access and their connections and through their passion, and looking at sort of their, all of a sudden their Rolodex of actors, and the amazing casting director Laura Rosenthal that they brought on. And it was like an epiphany when we finally landed on this idea of Broderick, because in so many ways this speaks to his film history, but it's almost the inverse, in that same way that this is the inverse for Geza. And it's like to Dust takes Broderick where he lands at the end of Election, let's say, and it's almost like Election takes him from Ferris Bueller down a misanthropic rabbit hole and lands him out in the worst possible place. And it's almost like this movie starts there and brings him back to the light through some sort of redemption. So it was enough. We had the context of, I love this idea of casting in a way that takes your, if you have this luxury, which we never thought that we would have, of getting somebody like Broderick or an A-list, it takes the audience's familiarity with their body of work and their persona, and it allows you to play with that persona. So you're almost, you're starting ahead. It's a head start with, your conception. We know Broderick, we know what he does. We know who he is. We know the types of roles he's been playing lately, the types of roles he played when he was younger. And so, and you nailed it for me. We knew that this movie needed an odd couple as odd as was written on the page. And to get, this specific odd couple, the most dramatic, non-professional actor in Geza, and even their methods of working are so different, and juggling those two different methods. And then, Broderick, who's master of stage and screen since he was a teenager, and comedic Borscht Belt, and to put those two energies, so much of the directing was just creating the chemistry experiment that allowed their energies to feed off of each other. And the thing that I loved the most, when I returned to the movie and as it was happening, was that idea of who's the straight man and who's the comic relief. It would seem to be Geza is the straight man and Broderick is the comic relief. But my favorite moments of the movie and my favorite moments of either of their performances are the ways in which Geza makes me laugh out loud and the ways in which Broderick breaks my heart repeatedly.
And it's almost like the more Shmuel kind of taps into Albert, right? The more he gets into the soul of the scientist, the more, it's almost like initially Matthew Broderick has kind of the projector falls and he's comedic, but the more he gets into him, the more you see that Albert is actually, he has this fragility about him, and he becomes much more of this in a way less humorous and more heartfelt. And I feel like Shmuel is really accessing the soul of this man who almost has a shell at the beginning of the film. And I wanted to let's play another clip just because I love the scene and because we are a science organization. I personally love when people show experiments on screen. It's something that I've always thought is interesting, because we always focus on discovery, and so this idea of doing an experiment. I just wanted to show this this small scene where they compare the pig's decomposition to the wife. If we can play that. This is almost like a scene that feels very like a mise en scène, it's a little film in itself right there. I don't want to reveal too much about the film, but I'm just interested. So we spoke a little bit about the characters, and but how did these two actors work together? Did they get along when they first met? Was there improv? I'm just interested in that aspect of working with these two people and getting them such the odd couple, and how they work together and how they first got along or didn't.
It's funny because we didn't have in the independent film realm, we didn't have the luxury of much time to rehearse or much time to really ingrain. I had a year's worth of over a year, Jason and I both, of meetings with Geza, and because of Geza's intense religiosity, he was just an amazing collaborator on all of that. And really, so Geza, like I could get into Geza's soul, like in terms of the buttons to push. And Geza was an actor who was very much, where am I at emotionally? I need those emotional answers. What is my arc, my journey in the scene? How am I coming and feeling? And Matthew, who, as you're racing towards an ideal production start date, you finally hook an actor and it's based on availability, in between various windows that they have. I got to have, a few, when Matthew and I first connected, and it was before he accepted the role, we had this amazingly beautiful, like here I am, with Matthew Broderick over a carafe of wine, and we're talking about like our parents having passed away and showing each other pictures of our children's on our phone. And I feel that's the most emotional. Like after that, it was like, okay, let's get to work. Like that stuff doesn't serve us here when we're working. So we had some meals with Jason and Matthew and Geza. We had one session a few weeks before we shot where we did a script read, kind of stopped and go, and asked, answered some questions. But the idea basically was, because there wasn't the luxury, there wasn't the money to buy rehearsal time or the space, there was also this embrace, and so much trust with Matthew's, saying, I don't want, and I feel this way as a director too, Matthew's like, leave some mystery, leave us the opportunity to discover things on the set. We don't want to lock things in. That's the beauty of film versus stage. And it was enough to know that like, they were a natural odd couple, and they had these different methods of working. Like the things that Matthew would ask about, he had, the emotional life under control. He would be like, this thing that you're asking me to do, like, I don't feel like this character would pick up the pencil in this moment. It was a very, and when you have an actor sort of calling you out on that sort of stuff, you're like, let's change that. Like, if you can't believe the business, then something is wrong with the concept or the setup of this thing that I'm asking you to do. And his questions were very very professional. There was also the reality of the fact that we were shooting like 8 to 10 pages a day, and Matthew had the lion's share of the dialogue. Like 80% of the dialogue was his talking about science. Yeah. And so the need to get in there and shoot that without the opportunity to do too many retakes, and then every night he's learning these new lines before the scene, and he, that rush and pace and flusteredness like added to exactly what the character needed to be. And so there was this sense too that you wish that you could shoot the film chronologically and let their natural dynamic grow over the course. But even in the absence of being able to do that, I feel like they're figuring each other out as characters, as actors, as human beings in real time on screen. And that if we had rehearsed or locked those things in, it wouldn't have captured that magic of these two people with very different personalities, worldviews, and approaches to working, trying to match those things that just created, again, the odd couple above the cartoon version that was, that was on the page, and they gave them flesh and blood in ways that delighted and surprised. And I think that, it's one of the biggest filmmaking lessons that I think I've learned and that I try to pass on when I'm teaching, that like, if you want it to look and sound exactly like you hear it in your head, then make an animated film and do all the voices yourself. And anything other than that, like, you're embracing the beautiful chaos of collaborators, real personalities, real limitations and conditions. And those are the things that make it come to life. And if you don't recognize the gift of those unexpected surprises as they're happening, and you just are trying to control and override them, then it's stale. But
Yeah, and it's almost like that chaos is very hard to, to duplicate, right? It's very hard to rehearse it. It's almost like it happens once, and that's, you have to capture that. And so the more that you try to make it happen or to rehearse it, there's something about like just these people just meeting for the first time or understanding each other, and it works really well with the characters of just having, like dancing around each other and trying to understand each other and in patience. And what's interesting is that you were mentioning about the science and Matthew Broderick having to learn the science, but what's interesting is that at some point he also says like, fuck it, right? He also realizes that the scripted science is not going to really provide answers to the situation. And in a way, I feel like that's also really beautiful. It's that you can explain all of the science, but at the end of the day, it's about this connection between both. I wanted to, Shawn, because we're running out of time, I wanted to ask you, because you were mentioning, all of these things that we learned in film school, and we both went to the same film school. But yeah, how does it feel? I mean, again, very big question, but how does it feel to make your first feature? And without getting too like into it, like what are like one or two things that you've come out of this like idea of, yeah, like your first feature film and what you may have learned in school and what happened, and are you excited to make more, or has it kind of led you to this like dark reality of the world of cinema? Like I mean, also with the distance between making something that is part of your own life and seeing it like a year later, and I'm just curious to like understand like your relationship to this, like this is my first feature film.
Yeah, I mean, this thing happened in a way that it's going to be hard to duplicate. And I don't mean the film itself. I mean the experience of this. I think of it as this like mix and match, mismatched caravan of people who came on to get this thing made. And this movie happened at a clip, of snowballed events that started accumulating and sort of moved with its own momentum towards production in a way that any film, especially a first film, and especially a first film that has the log line that this film has, that looks the way this film looks on paper, like it's a miracle that this movie got made, and that is only because of the love and support and the championship of the people who came to it, and the degrees of accidental fate in which which brought them to the project, or brought the project in front of them, and we realized that that's hard to find, and that's going to be hard to duplicate, but there is this sense, and I think I said this earlier on, that like the only thing you can do is be unadulteratedly you. The only thing you can do is follow the strangeness and be willing to expose it and go weirder and weirder and darker and darker. And I don't mean, in a hipster ironic sort of way. I mean in a truthful human. Like that thing that I don't want to show is the thing that I actually should show, because everybody else has that inside them too, and nobody's talking about it. So the idea of the more, this hope at the very least, that if you're trying to calculate, like, well, what's the script that's most likely to get sold? What's the script that's most likely to get made? It's always going to blow up in your face. Your passion for it is, or your lack of passion for it is going to be outed in one way or another, even if it's in the final product and that film somehow gets made. Like that you can only be you and be honest. And that is where the most universal, cliches and tropes, like the most universal is through that intensely, oddly specific. And, but that is the thing that, should you be open? Should you be patient? Should you be thinking outside of your own boxes and your own ways in which these things are actually going to happen? Because I think that like there were all these push and pull forces that got this movie made. If some producers come on and say, this should have $5 million, and other producers come on and say, this should be a lower budget, and I come on and say, I don't want to not be able to make another movie by making too expensive a movie that doesn't make its money back. Like, okay, so we're all going to, there's the plan A, there's the plan B, and then there's the moment where you just say, okay, enough is aligned, so we go. And this will still be the movie that it is, And then, so trust that, like, now I'm rambling off too many spokes, but like, trust that like will attract like, that your champions are the right champions and that they're waiting and that you need to wait for them. And you shouldn't rush things, but you also shouldn't wait forever to actually make something. And that you're making the movie that you're making in this time, in this space, with these collaborators and all these frustrating limitations. And that you're the master of knowing what the movie, I think that one of the biggest things that I come out of in film is that you are presiding over the gradual disintegration of the integrity of your original vision. And that isn't bleak, that's actually empowering. Because I know, okay, like we could lose this, we could lose this, we could lose this, and it's still the essence of the story. It's like tightening a diamond, you know, or we can't lose this because then it will no longer be what it is. So this is where we have to put those energies and those focuses. So that was one, that's I think one of the biggest takeaways, just like we have to write us and we have to hope that it, you know, that it comes together.
And Shawn, quickly, yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't, you know, so many other lessons, but like just gratitude. I can look back on the experience and say, I wish it did better in the marketplace. I wish was this a choice on set, or was this a choice in the editing room, or was this a disagreement that was had at some point about the way things should go? At various points, like, would those have changed the outcome of the film? Would Hollywood be knocking on my door? This scene was 5 seconds longer or shorter, or you do get caught in those really, really destructive mental spirals. But I think that, like, the overarching thing at any point in this experience, and I remember feeling it mostly on that last day of set, was just like gratitude. Like, how this is what I wanted to do since I was 5. And here I am getting the opportunity to do it first time out with this caliber of collaborator on this strange material that is so personal.
You know, they're all on board, right? They're on the ship, like believing in you, which is amazing, and believing in this, like, yeah.
And that this thing, you know, at every stage, I pinch myself still, even as I wonder, where does a career go from here? And especially, where does a career go from here after the industry reassembles itself in a pandemic? You know, like, every champion at every point along the way, and this film has been like it has resurrected itself multiple times. You know, that we, one door closed, we didn't get into Sundance, but we got into Tribeca, and Tribeca was the place where it should have premiered, and we didn't, you know, bigger distributors, you know, had considered it, but we ended up with this boutique distributor who gave it so much love, who insisted in a world that won't exist after COVID, that, like, we somehow give this thing 3 months of theatrical, like, whatever that.
I remember that it was, when I was in New York City, it was you know, it was all around. I remember seeing To Dust on the subway posters.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's you know, I think that gratitude and humility and patience, that these ways that one should live their life, you know, are still the biggest lessons that I even put towards, you know, navigating this industry. And this film will never not be a miracle in that it got made and how it got made, and the love that was brought to it by everybody involved.
Yeah, so much to, yeah, and I think this speaks a lot to, you know, everybody trying to make films. Quickly as we end, and obviously there's so much we can more speak about, but in these, well, there are 2 things that I want to ask. One is, really, one of the important things is there anything, or is there any stories about how it was received that, like, really were, like, you know, surprising or heartfelt, like, whether it's the Hasidic Jew community, or, you know, the community, the science community, the whoever, is there anything about that kind of reception that you were like, oh wow, that's, you know, something that was kind of a surprise, or something that, you know, really kind of touched you? Yeah, because I always feel that we make these about ourselves, and it's always really kind of coming from us, but then at some point it becomes its own entity and it's received and people respond to it differently and laugh and cry and all kinds of things. And I was just wondering if, and it happens to me a lot when I'm I can't watch my movies, but people laugh when they should cry, or people respond in very kind of strange ways or beautiful ways. And just wondering if you could share some stories about that.
I mean, there's
so many, probably.
So many, but I think that you know, seeing it at Tribeca in front of the audiences that we had, and it premiered in front of like 500 people, and then we got all these extra screenings because we won these awards there, like, and being able to have the Q&As, which became like group grief therapy. The ways in which people would raise their hand. I don't know anything about the Jewish faith, but I'm Catholic, and we embalm, but I felt so much, you know. We came to see this movie because we're up from Louisiana, and we saw Matthew Broderick's name, and we thought it'd be fun to see a movie at the Tribeca Film Festival. It feels like you made this movie about me mourning my mom, you know, like the way in which, and that was the idea of the movie, that it was, you know, this isn't just a Hasidic man. This is an individual grieving in the way that we all as individuals, you know, grieve in different ways. And so folks divulging, you know, those stories and coming to the movie with that degree of emotion, because that's what we do. I got a letter the other day from a woman in her 60s who's a writer in Canada that said, like, that told me this whole story about when her mom passed away. And that she was driven to understand, and she wishes it had happened in Italy and she didn't get to see it, and she wishes that she was able to go there and see what her mom's body looked like, and that a lot of her grief since then has been colored by the inability to confront that. So that's, you know, why we make art, like, to enter conversation, to feel a little less alone, you know, so those have been, you know, among the most beautiful responses. I'm fascinated. I feel like I have a real sort of interesting and challenged demographic understanding of the Jewish landscape, of film-going landscape. And like, there was, you know, people say, did this offend the Hasidic community? And my response, you know, my summary response to that, with any number of stories in there, is that, like, I have had Hasidic Jews thank me for this movie, and I have had Reform Jews call me anti-Semitic or self-loathing for this movie. Yeah. And everything in between. And I think that's great, because it provokes something. I think we've been shocked the degree to which we lived with this film inside my head. I lived with these images, you know, and there were versions where I wanted to make them, you know, the decay images even more provocative in the movie. And then you realize, like, people writing about the movie saying, this is too much. I don't want to see this. This is throwing this stuff in your face. And you're like, oh, I've been numbed to it after the course of a few years. So that the belief that it still has that power. But I feel like I've been really, I don't know, like, proudly getting into those conversations where you're defending somebody at a Q&A specifically who is objecting to this movie on religious grounds, who feels that it's anti-Semitic or disrespectful of the Hasidic community. And I have a lot of answers about the way we went about it, the way we had Hasidic, not just Hasidic consultants, but Geza involved in the film. The idea that it's folklore, and the idea that it's a Talmudic discussion, and the ways in which this movie is so Jewish down to its DNA, and it looks sacrilegious on the surface. And I always get very, very offended and defensive, because I think that it's the most surface level read of the film that gets offended by it. But I also feel secretly proud that the film is provoking something in people that they don't.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like just the idea that it sparks, you know, or it hits a nerve. I mean, it's probably that you're onto something. You know what I mean? It's like the polarized responses is what we want, right? We don't want like numbing responses. We want people to respond, whether it's violently against and I feel like, at least for me, that's always a sign that I'm on the right road when I get like very, very strong responses to the work, because it means that it's speaking to them maybe in ways that also speaks to their own heritage or their own childhood or their own, you know, conceptions. And so I think that's, you know, that's amazing about it.
There's a this is sort of our arcane minutia, but it was fascinating to me because I grew up in South Florida. I had this false belief, as well as the distributors, that like the 60, 70, 80-year-old Jewish film going set is going to eat this movie up. It's Borscht Belty, it's Broderick. And, you know, we waited till later in the run to play it down there after it hopefully generated some buzz. And I remember like the more intellectual literati audience that came to see the Tribeca of that age and demographic laughed out loud. I feel like the movie we had a great first weekend in Florida, and it blew up in our faces down there, because I feel like I feel like there's an algorithm that is like, the older you are, plus the amount of plastic surgery you've had equals the amount that you will dislike this movie. And it's like, in retrospect, it's like, of course that audience would be repulsed by some of this content. Of course that audience who is actually culturally Jewish, but not deeply ingrained to know that like, oh, what we're doing is exploring Kabbalah and Hasidic folklore, would be like, I see a Jew and I see a pig and I see you forcing me to confront my mortality, and I reject you outright. And I see you laughing at it, and I see you making jokes about it. Like,
and you're exposing it, and you're also laughing about it. It's like almost like a double kind of injury to them to some extent.
Yeah, and folks in the film realm too, who like treat what's on the screen. And I think this is the beautiful trick of cinema, right? Like, you know, and again, if you know, maybe it's missteps on our end in the tonal front, where it's just like, you're showing something and it's real and it's offensive. Like, no, this is the cinematic dreamscape. Like, this is the cinematic, folkloric, parabolistic, Hasidic dream of grief. You know, like the things that this character is doing isn't things that we're endorsing as the genre things this character is stumbling into, aren't the things we're endorsing as filmmakers. Like, can you look a layer? Can we look a layer deeper to understand the Lynchian nightmare that is informing the plot of the film? Like,
Shawn, I'm curious to know really briefly. I mean, we're totally way behind, like way above 1 hour, but because Unorthodox just, you know, was out on Netflix, and to some way there's, you know, resonance with that. Did you show it to the Hasidic Jewish community? Was there any? I mean, you had mentioned that there was a very polarized response, but have you been able to show it to them specifically, or organize screenings there, or it's just not been something that's?
We have had Hasidic audiences, and I can kind of have garnered that from sort of online responses, some in-person responses, but it's just a reality of the Hasidic community that they don't go.
Right.
The ultra-Orthodox Haredi black coat community, they don't go to see movies. They allegedly download and bootleg and stream plenty of them. But it's not a conversation that you're really allowed to have out in the open with anyone except folks who have 1 foot outside of the community. But we did have Hasidic advisors at every stage, writing stage, on set. And the Hasidic community is not a monolith. The Jewish Judaism is a monolith. The Hasidic community has so many different strands of levels of tolerance or engagement for the secular, for science, for art, and for culture, and willingness to engage. We heard, Jason heard recently from somebody, a boyfriend of a friend or something, that he was like, you have a lot, you know, even if you didn't hear about it, like this movie is loved by a lot of Jewish people. like even if we didn't want to admit it or have that conversation, you know, and I don't know, you know, what docket of Jewish, what binder of Jewish people he has that love the movie, but I appreciated that, because again, like especially dealing with the Hasidic community, we had to do it so respectfully, especially dealing with the Hasidic community and material that is this on the surface sacrilegious, you know. It was always needed to be done with the utmost sort of integrity and respect and humility. And so when I've gotten that feedback, especially from people who do, don't just dismiss it outright, and there has been that proof of resonance, it's sort of one of the most comforting things. There's a young, I've sort of become, really, really friendly with this young, aspiring, formerly Hasidic filmmaker who reached out to me after he saw To Dust, and I have so many hopes for this writer director. He wants to be a Hasidic, he wants to be a horror director, and he wrote this horror Hasidic short that is so informed by the psychology of leading the community in a way that we can only aspire to in To Dust, in terms of engaging in those nuanced conversations. But he said, like, I feel like I wanted to thank you because Hasidic films, like Unorthodox, they live in the realm of the neo-realist or the super realist. And they also, so they never want to go into genre. And they also just lay at the surface. And I feel this too. They're very, very important stories, like the Unorthodox story, but it always pits it. They pit the individual against the community. The community is oppressive and the individual needs to escape. And if the individual
escapes, it's always about kind of that renegade or that like the kind of the trespassing or the establishment, and also kind of observational cinema verite, always trying to kind of capture like the behind the scenes of what's happening. And
and if the individual escapes, it's a triumph, and if the individual doesn't, it's a tragedy. And that is the template of so much Hasidic content. And I think that the world has sort of a Hasidic voyeuristic obsession too, like a fetishism, which is, I believe, dangerous. like I want to see behind that curtain. I want to see into that world. I want to validate my beliefs that it's so backwards. And the truth is so much more complex and layered and challenging and difficult and beautiful. So we wanted to make a movie about a man who wanted to stay, who wanted to return. I don't feel like we had the right as non-Hasidic filmmakers to make a movie about a man who needs to leave. Like, the thing he wants more than anything is to reconcile these divergent thoughts with the faith in the community that he loves. And so to get this feedback from this Hasidic filmmaker who was like, you guys got it right. This feels like my childhood. This feels like my journey. And there was a Hasidic audience member at Tribeca. Again, he was at Tribeca, but he was full black coat, payas. And he came up afterwards and he said, this reminds me of my father mourning my mother.
Wow.
He went to the grave every day and the community frowned upon it because you're not allowed that degree of public facing grief.
Wow.
Or deification of a grave or of the dead. And so, like, those things are things that I hold on to so strongly, that we got something right, and that more than anything else, that we did it respectfully,
Yeah. Well, Shawn, I mean, as a final note, like in a few, like as like a little pitch, I'd love to know, like, in these pandemic times, what are you working on, or what's the day, like a day in the life of Shawn these days in the middle of COVID? And I know that your son there is going to school and all that, but yeah, what are you working on anything, or what's cooking?
Well, a day has been, all homeschooling all the time. My partner, she's had the consistent 9 to 5 that hasn't ceased remotely. And so every waking hour of energy has been shifted to daughter. There's been various transitions throughout the pandemic. We went to Ohio for some months. We had to move apartments. And I feel like it's like 3 weeks after each transition where I somehow get the energy to be awake at night and to work. Yeah. So throughout it all, in fits and starts, Jason and I have continued writing, and we're working on multiple projects. There's another Sloan project in the mix, which we never really accepted. There's another finished feature script, which we're trying to tweak and get to the point of development. But at this point, we're trying to build a bridge, as everyone is, to the other side of this thing. And if they don't know, if Guillermo del Toro doesn't know, that his next film is going to resume production in September, nobody's sitting around and waiting for the next Shawn Snyder, Jason Begay film. And so there's been a lot of both frustrating, daunting, and empowering navigating of the waters to say, okay, these are films we want to make. is this likely to be the next film we can make in the aftermath of COVID? Or is there something that is a bit more DIY, gritty film school spirit? Because I want to move in both directions. You know, like that experience of making a middle round, you know, low budget independent film with a very, very massive crew. I want to increase scope and I want to decrease scope. I want to be able to Soderbergh it in that regard to some extent. So is there something where, because we're artists and we want to direct and we want to write and we want to get stuff made, and even though the act of writing is a hopeful prayer, you know, for the future, that it's building a bridge and an act of therapy, even if those movies never get made, like I want to be directing again sooner rather than later. We said before the call started that directing is this weird thing that you know, it's your passion in life, and if you're lucky, you get to do it once every 7 years. Like, so and if you're really lucky, you get to do it far more often. But I think we're trying to, you know, move through different phases of working on things we've been working on, starting new things, and then thinking like, what is that thing that we could, you know, even take an iPhone out and make something, to be making something. I think that there's a lot of folks who are bored and sitting around and are willing to experiment now, and that we're going to need to reinvent the industry, all of us, in some regard. And so there's something exciting about that willingness to experiment and take risks. So that's all super vague about the content.
No, but
working.
You're right. It's shaking the system and the establishment a little bit, and hopefully we'll come out of it with new ways of thinking about, you know, how to make films, how to distribute films. And I feel like, you know, I agree with you that the more you can experiment with, you know, what's interesting about To Dust is that it kind of sits right at that interface between, you know, kind of touching upon like the Hollywood world, but also in the independent world. And I feel that you should definitely go in both directions. And we're excited. I'm excited to see what the next Snyder movie is, you know, as much as the Christopher Nolan, you know, films, which obviously has been sparking a lot of.
The same goes in reverse. Yeah, that Kaufman and Nolan dropped both of those films in the same week.
I was just reading an article about why is everybody whispering in Nolan's movies? But anyway, that's for a larger conversation. But Shawn, thank you so much. I want so everybody to watch the film. We're so lucky to be able to show it at Imagine Science. First time we show your work. I know we had a work in progress. You presented the project at Imagine Science in, I don't know if it was 2015, 2016, at the production lab. Shout out to NYU and John Santor and everybody over there. And we're so lucky to be able to see it. And yeah, stay in touch. This is always like more than anything, a selfish way to reconnect with old friends. And
absolutely. And
everybody out there making films. Yeah.
I feel like Jason and I have this, we stumbled across this other Sloan project we've gotten a few initial very, very development grants for. And as I said earlier, I'm the least likely person to think about a career making science films. And yet somehow they keep occurring to me. So I feel like I have an Alma-Rata course, maybe, that you know, I might be making a lot more science films than I ever imagined I might be making. So glad to be in this ecosystem.
Absolutely, you're in the network. What I say, sometimes joking to people, I say the most problematic word in what we do, like when we talk about Imagine Science, is the word science, because ultimately everything is science. So even labeling it is somewhat problematic, because everything ultimately links to science. So it's like calling it an art. Well, the word art film is also very problematic. But anyway, for another discussion. Shawn, thank you so much. Good luck with parenting and school, and keep writing. And thank you for everybody for tuning in.
Thank you guys
so much.
Yeah, looking forward to being in touch. And good luck with coloring. Yeah.
Yeah.